Okay, what we're going to do first, obviously, is gather some information to solve this problem. We want to know what's going to happen to an egg when we put in vinegar, and then we're also going to switch it later to corn syrup. So we've saved our problem, now we have to gather information. There's lots of things that we could talk about eggs, but knowing that the egg is going into vinegar, kind of the most relevant thing to keep in mind is that the egg has a hard shell. Some things that you might know about vinegar: it's a thin, watery liquid, meaning it pours easily. It's not thick and viscous like syrup. And some of you may know it is an acid. So keeping those things in mind might help you make a prediction about what might happen when we put an egg in vinegar. After we let it sit in vinegar, we're going to then switch it after a couple of days into corn syrup. Corn syrup is much more viscous and thick. So when you pour it, it's going to kind of glop along. It's not going to be thin and pour easily. That's what we mean by viscous. So keeping these things in mind, you now need to make a hypothesis. You may want to pause the video at this time to give yourself time to do that. Once your hypothesis is done, the first day we simply took 100 milliliters of vinegar that we bought at Wegmans, and we put the egg into that vinegar. And as soon as I put the egg in, you will notice bubbles starting to form. We then covered that and simply left it overnight for 2 nights. I have now an egg that has already been sitting in vinegar for 2 nights. So when we look at it, if we look down at it from the top, we can see that there's this foamy white stuff on top, which is most likely what is left of our shell. This egg, now that I've taken the egg out and rinsed it off, we're also going to notice the amount of vinegar is no longer at 100. So if we go up to if we look at our lab, the first thing we notice the day that we put the egg in the vinegar is that the egg fizzes and bubbles. Then when we let it sit for 2 nights and we looked at it, we see that our egg is large and full like a water balloon, and that the shell is gone. The other thing we notice is that we used to have 100 milliliters of vinegar, now we only have 75 milliliters of vinegar. So let's take a closer look at that egg. Now that the shell is gone, it's very squishy and soft like a water balloon. And it's much larger because that 25 milliliters of vinegar probably diffused into this egg. The next part of our procedure then tells us to take the egg and put it into some corn syrup, which again is very thick. So I've measured out 100 milliliters of corn syrup. Put the egg into the corn syrup. I'm just going to gently push it down to get it submerged. And again, we would let that sit for a day or 2, covered on our back shelf of the classroom. Here's an egg that has been sitting in the corn syrup for a couple of days. So if we take the egg out, we can see that it is very deflated. When we put it in the vinegar, it was very full and firm and large. Now it's very small and dented and deflated. And the other thing we can notice is the amount of liquid. We started with 100 milliliters of corn syrup. Now we're up to about 125. And you can also see some layering. So actually it's not all just corn syrup anymore. Now we're looking at the vinegar that diffused into the egg has diffused out of the egg and on top of the vinegar, or pardon me, on top of the corn syrup. So back to our chart, after 2 days in the corn syrup, the egg is now deflated and there are 2 layers. And it started out at 100 milliliters of corn syrup. Now there's 125 milliliters, which is corn syrup actually and a layer of vinegar on top.